Hi everyone, the partial prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, and then when Jesus comes, we will see fully. So today I wanted to talk about we have got to be so close. What I'm really going to talk about is the 9th of Av because there's just a lot of connections with that holiday. And I don't know if something significant is going to happen on that day. But let me show you what I got, and you could think about it. So, one of the things I wanted to mention was 9/11, 2001. Okay. So that was definitely a big, significant day in America. And so here on People Magazine, they say the day that shook America. Um, One of the things that I read was someone had said about 9/11 was that was like the first time we kind of like had like a terrorist attack on American soil. Um, I mean, which um, kind of like in this generation, because we did have for World War II, we did have Pearl Harbor. Um, but it was kind of a shock for people in this country in 2001 because I mean, we saw terrorist attacks, on American bases and things like that overseas, but we had never really seen anything happen, here in our country. So that was, it was, so that's one of the reasons why it was kind of shocking. Um, and so it really kind of changed the face of America. Like, all of a sudden, I mean, like for me, I never like even paid attention to um, Muslim terrorists. So it was kind of an eye opener for some of us. Um, and so um, one of the things, so I wanted to mention, so for 9/11, the date obviously was kind of significant. And so we talked a lot about that at the time, or other people talked about it at the time, the 9 and the 11, and the significance of that. And because there's just a lot of prophetic connections. One thing that I thought about was interesting, it was 2001. And so if you add those numbers together, you get three. Um, and so that's significant because um, the number three is definitely connected to the Messiah. Um, and the Bible talks a lot about certain things happening on the third day, like Esther goes to the king on the third day. So the third day is a very significant day. So one of the things that I want to propose is that I think there's some pictures that God is showing us in 9/11 that relate prophetically to what I really think they relate very prophetically to the coming of the Messiah. Um, and um, and so I think there might be some clues in 9/11 that might help us know when to, or where, well, when to look for the Messiah. Um, one of the things, because what's interesting about 9/11, one of the pictures of 9/11 is we had the North Tower and the South Tower of the World Trade Center were attacked, were hit by airplanes, and they both fell on that day. And I've talked about this before in some of my other videos, but we have the Northern Kingdom of Israel and we have the Southern Kingdom of Israel. And so I think there's a prophetic picture in 9/11 that has to do with the time frame of the coming of the Messiah. Um, and really what I think it is that the northern pillar and the southern pillar are, um, maybe aren't going to be destroyed, but we're going to see burning from both sides. So um, what I've said before is that I believe the northern kingdom is represented by, or like, America represents the northern kingdom. And so that would be like the 10 missing tribes, um, like the Gentile Christian church, might um, come out of the 10 missing tribes. And so that would be the northern kingdom. The southern kingdom, that's an easier one to figure out because that's connected to Judah, the tribe of Judah. And so that connects to the nation of Israel. And so what's interesting is that we've already seen in America, we've seen the burning, the smoke coming up from the cities with the rioting that's been going on in this country for today's like day 65 of the riots. And so that's why I think we can expect the Messiah really soon, because the next thing that we want to look for is the southern kingdom burning from the southern kingdom. And I think what we could be looking for is Israel getting attacked by their enemies, like seriously attacked. I mean, they're always getting attacked. They're always getting missiles lobbed over at them, um, because their enemies are so close and everything. Um, but I think that's what we can expect. And then, so what's interesting too about 9/11 is that that was 18 years ago, 18 years and 10 months. Tomorrow would be 18 years, 10 months, the 20th day. So the 18-year time frame is interesting to me because that connects to the 666 number. It also connects to Jesus told a parable about the tower that fell on 18 people. So I think there could be a prophetic significance that, since September 11, 2019, was the start of the 18th year, and so something significant could be happening in this year. So we're running out of time, basically, for the 18th year. And so 9/11, 2020 would be the 19th year. And so that's why I think we can expect something really soon. And so then here's another, and so I wanted to show you there's just so many things that I've been seeing. I think God is constantly sending us prophetic messages, if we can be aware of these things and, try to figure out what he might be saying. So this is the Trump Tower in New York City, America. And this was a fire that happened on the 50th floor of the Trump Tower. And it happened on Saturday, April 7th in 2018. 6 firefighters got injured fighting this fire. And so for me, what I thought was kind of interesting about this fire is that it kind of reminded us of 9/11. I mean, obviously it was, just on a much, 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 much smaller scale than 9/11, but the picture, the fact that the fire was coming out on the two sides, you have that same picture of kind of like the two pillars, burning. And so it's interesting too that it happened in 2018. So you got that 18 number again, the 666 number. I thought it was interesting that 6 firefighters got injured. There was a guy that got killed, the guy who lived in this apartment, and I think he was in his 60s. And so there was you see 6 and the 6 number related to his age. And then I thought it was very significant that the blaze broke out on the 50th floor, because I think the number 5 is connected, very strongly connected to the Messiah and the coming of the Messiah. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later, that number 5. And then here's the Notre Dame fire. And so that happened, like, I don't know if you're seeing kind of this pattern where we kind of have like 2 towers or 2 pillars, the 2 pillars being represented. Now, what was interesting about this fire, and this one kind of confuses me a little bit, but we have like kind of this big spire in the middle of the cathedral, and then at, I don't know what side of the cathedral there, you kind of have these two towery type pillars. Um, and so with this fire, the big pillar in the middle, the big spire in the middle, burnt up and fell over. But what was really interesting about this fire is that if you watched the videos of the people in France, so this happened in France. If you watch the videos, this was like a type of 9/11 to them. Okay, um, the reactions were the same. Um, and they believe that this could have been a terrorist attack, or that it was like definitely intentionally set. Um, um, so there was definitely connections, to 9/11. I mean, you have the smoke, coming up. Um, and so that happened April 15th through the 16th in 2019. Um, so that was Nissan 10 and Nissan 11. So we have that number 11 there. I was wondering if it was possible, if this Notre Dame fire was like, if God was using it to be like an 11-month warning about the coronavirus. Because what was interesting is that, okay, so April 15th and 16th was the Notre Dame fire, and then on April 17th, someone tried to set fire to the St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. So that was very interesting. So what was interesting to me about that, it happened on April 17th. I thought that was interesting because we have St. Patrick's. Well, St. Patrick's Day is March 17th. So it was kind of interesting that it was connected to the 17. And if you know anything about St. Patrick, he he used the shamrock, the three-sided shamrock. Like, he was a missionary in Ireland, and he used the three-sided shamrock to teach the people in Ireland about the Trinity. Okay. Well, so what I thought was kind of interesting is that you have, like 666 is, you would have a connection as 666 with St. Patrick with the three-sided shamrock. Okay. Um, and so the reason why I think this is really interesting, and why I think this could be a warning about the coronavirus, both these fires, is that what I believe is that right now America and Israel, and kind of like the whole world, is under judgment for the Donald Trump's deal of the century. Okay, because we're not allowed to divide the land. Okay, and so the deal of the century, I talk about in my other videos about where I get the 666 and connect it to Donald Trump, and I connect it to the deal of the century. And so what I believe is that because of the deal of the century, America is going to suffer 3 time frames of judgment, and Israel is going to suffer 3 time frames of judgment. Okay. And so, so that's why it's interesting that we see kind of with the St. Patrick's Cathedral, the connection to the 666 with the shamrock. And then what's interesting too is that fire, I mean, fortunately the guy wasn't able to set the fire, but that was a cathedral in New York City. So just very interesting. And so, so I talk about it being an 11-month warning, because what happened was the shutdown for the coronavirus in America started on March 18th. Okay, so that would be the day after, March 17th, which was 11 months after April 17th. Okay, and then March 17th was a really significant date, the day before the shutdown, and I talked about that in one of my previous videos. So anyways, that's what I think God could be telling us in this fire. But we have, kind of the same thing where we see the 2 pillars, but this one has the large one, in the middle that falls, that burns up and falls over. Okay, so then this year, just um, you know, 11 days ago, we had the Gothic Cathedral of St. Peter and St. Paul in Nantes. Um, that's also in France. Okay, um, and so what's interesting about this cathedral is built in the 15th century. So the fire was on July 18th, 2020. Okay, so I thought it was interesting that 11 days later is today. Um, so is it an 11-day warning? I don't know, because so far not much has happened today. And so we won't really know what God's saying with this fire, except I think there's some pictures, connected to 9/11 with this fire. Um, and so, so let me show you this other slide. One of the things that I see in this picture is, um, so um, when the fire was burning, you saw the firemen came and put their ladder up there to put out the fire. And so that got me thinking about Jacob's ladder. And so let's read about Jacob's ladder. This is in Genesis 28. It said he had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Okay, so I really think just in the, like, this picture is just repeated all throughout the scripture, where what I think we have is, the picture would be like Jesus is in the middle with, um, like the northern kingdom on the, on his left hand side, and the southern kingdom on his right hand side. And so Jesus would be in the middle. Okay. And so with this ladder, you have a repeat of that picture, because like the two rungs, or the two sides of the ladder would be like the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, and then Jesus would be one of the angels ascending and descending on this ladder. But I also think it's a picture of like the two pillars burning, because um like basically you have like some angels are ascending and then some angels are descending. Okay, so what I really think it connects to is, because what I believe is that when we see Israel burning, that the Messiah is going to show up at the same time. Okay, um I've heard someone say the expression that when the bombs come down, we go up. Okay. And they're talking about the rapture, and I don't really believe in the rapture the way it's traditionally taught. Because what I'm looking for is the second coming. And so, but you could take that expression. It's like when the missiles go down, Jesus comes up, or Jesus comes back, basically. Um, and then we see in Revelation 11 that, um, you know, the two witnesses that are raised from the dead, they hear a voice saying, "Come up here," um, and so that's definitely a connection to Jesus. So it's like, um, he's gonna resurrect the two pillars, and then he's gonna say, "Come on up here," okay. Um, so that's Jacob's ladder. Okay, so then this is fun. This is from the Back to the Future movie. For whatever reason, God chose to put some prophetic, like really highly significant prophetic messages in this movie. I made a short video about this earlier. I mean, there's so much to say just about this movie. And so these pictures here show like the 9/11 connection. Okay, so what we have is, on the right hand side, on the left hand side, we have Marty walking past the sign that says the Twin Pines Mall, and it's at 1:16 a.m. is when he's at the mall. Okay, but if you flip around here on the right hand side, if you flip it around the clock, you see 9/11. Okay. I didn't figure that out. Someone else showed that to me. And so there's a 9/11 connection in the movie. And what's really interesting too is that the Twin Pines Mall turns into the Lone Pine Mall. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so here we go. In this picture, um, so you might not have seen the movie, but Marty goes back into the past. He runs over there's a guy who's growing twin pines and trying to start a pine, what do you call it, farm. And he started with two pines, and Marty runs over one of the pines, and then when he comes back to the present day, the mall's name gets changed to the Lone Pine Mall. Okay. um so what's interesting is that when Marty comes back from the past, he returns to the mall at 1:33 a.m. Okay, and so that's this picture here on the right hand side, where it's the Lone Pine Mall, and it's 1:33 a.m. Okay, um, and then what's interesting is that Marty returns to the mall right when Doc Brown is being shot by the Libyans. Okay, so this is very prophetical. Let me see if I can explain it to you. Okay, so what we have is Marty, standing here in front of the sign at 1:33 a.m. Okay, and then like I said, Doc is being shot by the Libyans. Okay, like Marty wanted to get there early enough that he could stop the Libyans from shooting Doc Brown. Um, and he ended up not getting there early enough. Like he ended up getting there right at the exact same time that Doc was getting shot by the Libyans. Okay. But one of the things I wanted to point out here is, what if you consider, look where Marty's position is. I mean, it's probably hard for you to see in this picture, but he's standing on the right hand side of the sign. Okay. What if Marty is the 5? Okay, so this is coming from, we see this number 1335 it comes from the book of Daniel. Okay, and God says you're blessed if you can make it to the 1335, day 1335. And so, because let's look at Marty's name. There's 5 letters in Marty, right? There's 5 letters in McFly. Okay, and then we have Marty as kind of like a messianic figure who saves Doc Brown from the Libyans. Okay, he doesn't get there early enough, but he had in the past, he wrote a note when he was in the past. He wrote a note to Doc to warn him about the Libyans, and so Doc ends up wearing a bulletproof vest. And so, so Marty could be a type of messianic figure who saves Doc Brown from the Libyans. Okay. And so we see in this picture 1335. Okay. And so what I think, and so I think this is so prophetical because it's repeating that picture of like when Israel, so think of Doc being like the Jewish people in Israel, when they're getting attacked, is exactly when the Messiah shows up, and exactly when Marty shows up. Okay, the messianic figure, and that is exactly at the 1335. Okay, does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. And so that's what this picture is showing us, and I think that is so significant. And then another prophetic picture. I mean, it's just incredible because there's so many prophetic pictures in these movies. Okay, in this first movie. Oh, the other thing too that's significant about this is the Back to the Future movie. The first one came out 35 years ago. It actually came out on July 3rd, 1985. Okay, let's see, is that what it was? Yeah. So 35 years ago. So I think that's very significant too. So, you know, so I think we can expect the time frame of the 133, the 5 of the 133 and 5 to show up really soon. So then this is also from the movie, and then this is when Oh, I talk about this in my other movie, but we see that same concept here of, um, like the the northern kingdom burning and the southern kingdom burning, and then this license plate says out of time. Okay, and so I talked in my other videos about how if you see the northern pillar burning and the southern pillar burning, you are out of time. But I did not realize that out of time could also be a picture of the Messiah, because um who is, you know like, who would be, Jesus would be someone that's not connected to time, that is kind of like out of time, you know um so I thought that was kind of interesting. So you see a repeat of that picture here, you know um and then this is just, I just wanted to mention this really quick. This is from the second movie, where um there, it's kind of a prophetic shadow of the rioting that's going on in America right now. So I think that's kind of interesting because this happened in the second movie. And so what I think is that, it's possible that this rioting is the second judgment on America. Um, I mean, it depends how you count it. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but it's definitely connected to, I mean, we have this Biff guy, um, who in the, this is an alternate reality in the second movie, an alternate time frame, and then where Biff is like this rich guy, and he has his own tower. I mean, just a big connection to Trump and his tower. So definitely very interesting. Okay, so um, so I want to talk about where we see other places where we see this picture in the Bible. And so the burning bush, Moses with the burning bush, is definitely a a picture of, it's this same picture, because if you read about, okay, so this is a verse that talks about the burning bush. It says, this is from Exodus 3:2. It says, the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, yet the bush was not consumed. And so, so the angel of the Lord could be a picture of Jesus, okay? And so he's in the midst of the bush, okay? And so what we have is like that concept where you have this fire burning, and this comes from the fiery furnace too, where there's Daniel's three friends are in the fiery furnace, and then all of a sudden they see a fourth messianic figure, okay? Um, and so that's what we're seeing, is the angel of the Lord is appearing when there's a fire going on, okay? Um, and then, so I thought it was interesting too that, okay, so this says, yet the bush was not consumed. I'm going to go back to, let's see if I can get there. Yeah, this fire, where what's kind of interesting is that there really wasn't that much damage, okay? Um, with this fire, which was good. Um, so I thought that was kind of an interesting connection with that fire to the burning bush, okay? And then we see a repeat of this picture with Samson and the two pillars, and I'll talk about that on the next screen. Okay, we see a repeat of this picture with Jesus on the cross, because it says, and there were two thieves crucified with him, one on the right hand and the other on the left. So what we see is like, okay, so if one of the thieves represents the northern kingdom and the other thief represents the southern kingdom, what we're seeing is them, um, like, um, being under judgment. Okay, they're dying for their crimes. Okay, and so we see that picture here. And I mean, obviously in the scripture it talks about how the thieves are definitely guilty, but Jesus isn't. Just wanted to point that out. And then what's interesting too, okay, so then I have a picture here of the nativity scene. That's also a picture because you have Moses, you have Mary and Joseph with Jesus in the middle, okay? And we see that like on Christmas cards and everything all over the place. It gets repeated all over the place. And so Mary would be a picture of the northern kingdom, the Gentile Christians, and then Joseph would be a picture of the Jewish people, and then with Jesus in the middle. Okay, so here's the story of Samson. And okay, so I won't read this. I talked about this in one of my other videos, but basically they called for Samson, and they made him stand between the pillars, okay? And Samson said to the boy who was holding his hand, "Let me feel the pillars on which the house rests, that I may lean against them." Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. And about 3,000 men and women were on the roof looking on while Samson was amusing them. Then Samson called to the Lord and said, "O Lord God, please remember me, and please strengthen me just this time, O God, that I may be avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes." So Samson grasped the 2 middle pillars on which the house rested and braced himself against them, the one with his right hand and the other with his left. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he bent with all his might, so that the house fell on the lords and all the people who were in it. So the dead whom he killed at his death were more than those whom he killed in his life. Okay, so what's interesting about this story, so we see Samson with the 2 pillars, and basically everybody's falling. Samson with the 2 pillars. We see 3,000 people ended up getting killed. Okay, that there's a connection with that to 9/11 because that's approximately how many people died on that day. And then what's interesting too is that Samson says, "Let me be avenged for my 2 eyes." Okay, so that would be a connection to the 2 witnesses. Okay, that we see in Revelation 11. Is that Revelation 11? So that's interesting too with Revelation 11, is that even just the chapter number is the 11, and 11 itself is a picture of like 2 pillars. Okay, so just fascinating. You can't make this up. This has to be a God thing. Okay, and I've talked in my other videos about how, see, this picture too is repeated in the crossing of the Red Sea. Okay, because it talks about there being a wall of water on the right and the wall of water on the left. Okay, and the Israelites cross on the dry land in the middle. Okay, and I've been talking about how we want to be on the dry land with Messiah in the middle. And so I see water and sea being connected to lies, okay? But it could also be connected to people, like God's enemies. And so, I think we have the sea of Obamas on one side, the sea of Trump's on the other side, and that God's people, the Israelites, would, we're, when Jesus comes, he's going to do this division, okay? And, we're going to be walking through on the dry land with him, just like the crossing of the Red Sea, okay? Okay, so 1335, let's talk about that, okay? Because this is what it all connects to. I think, okay, so I didn't put the verses in here, but this comes out of Esther, Esther 4. I think this is Esther 4. And but we also see this same pattern repeated in when Joseph is interpreting the dreams of the baker and the cupbearer. Okay, there's this concept of 3 days plus 3 days, and then like with the cupbearer, it's 3 days and then 3 days, and then with the baker, the 3 baskets are 3 days, and then there's 3 days. Okay, and so I think this connects to where we have 3 days or 30 days. Esther talks about 30 days, but um, 30 days could be the same as 3 days. Okay, I think that connects to Trump's deal of the century, which connects to the 666. And I talked about that in my other videos, so I won't repeat that. And then Esther says, have the Jews fast for 3 days, and then I and my maidens will fast for 3 days. Okay. And so, so what that means basically is that, like I said, America's going to have 3 days of judgment for the deal of the century, or 666, and then Israel's going to have 3 days of fasting or judgment for 666. And I think, some of it's been happening at the same time, which is good. um, and so, and what I believe is that Esther and the maidens, Esther is a picture of Trump, and her maidens are a picture of the American Christians. Okay. And so what I want to propose is, okay, so what I wrote here is that what I think is the 3 days of fasting are the three time frames of judgment for 666. I wrote down where I said the first day was the coronavirus shutdown. The second day is the 30 days of Trump's people protesting. And then the third day is like 66th day of Obama's people rioting, or however long it ends up being. But I'm also wondering if maybe this, what I have for the second day, where it's 30 days of Trump's people protesting, because that wasn't really, that much suffering or anything. I'm wondering if the second day could, like, if you move up the rioting to be the second day, then I'm wondering if the third day is connected to Israel's third day. Okay. And so so those are two possibilities, and we'll see how it plays out. So let's talk about Israel's 3 days of their judgment. Okay. And so they've also suffered the coronavirus shutdown like the rest of the world. The whole world suffered that. Okay. The second day, they are also having people protesting in Israel against Netanyahu. And at the same time, they're having, um, others of their enemies are rising up against them. They're having problems with their other enemies. Um, and so I just kind of wonder if the second day is just kind of this general like problems with their enemies. Um, so America right now is having, or I don't know if I should say America, but God's people in America right now are having problems with their enemies, with God's enemies in America, these rioters that are tearing apart the cities. Okay. And so same thing with Israel, because I mean they've been getting some missiles shot at them, um, and then they have had people. I mean, it's so interesting because the two countries, a lot of the things that are happening in America and Israel are very similar. Okay, so just like everyone is giving Trump a hard time for the coronavirus and how he's dealt with it, Netanyahu's getting a lot of flack for how he dealt with the coronavirus in Israel. And kind of the same thing. It has to do with the opening of the country, that Netanyahu's getting flack for, because they actually were. I think people felt like they handled it well at first, but then they weren't happy with how it opened up the country. I mean, I think it has to do with because a lot of people are getting sick, again in Israel, and so there's been a lot of protesting in Israel against Netanyahu. And so not just for the coronavirus, but also a lot of people were protesting about he wanted to annex the West Bank, and so he got a lot of protests and flack, from um, lots of people. Like, I mean, lots of Israel's enemies and allies around the world were, um, expressing their unhappiness with Trump wanting to annex the West Bank. So, so so we see that as judgment for like the second six, and then the third time frame of judgment for Israel, I believe is when we're going to see Israel get attacked by the little horn that we read about in Daniel, um, whoever that ends up being. Um, um, and so then what I believe is the five of the 1 3 3 5 connects to the time of the Messiah. Okay, and so there's kind of this overlap between the third day is the fifth day. Um, you know, um, because when Israel gets attacked is when the Messiah shows up. Okay, and then so what we have is the fifth day is the time of the Messiah, or the dividing of time, which could be a picture of like, um, Jesus coming to make a division between God's people and God's enemies. Okay, and so that God's people will no longer be under judgment. Okay, when the Messiah comes. Okay, which is good. Take us out of judgment. We're all kind of tired of the coronavirus. Okay, and the rioting too. Um, and then, so that connects to with the Esther story, it connects with Esther going into the king um, on the third day, basically. Um, so that's that. Okay, so then just I want to talk about the 9th of Av because there's a connection with 9/11. Let's see, do I? Yeah, I talk about that on the next day. Okay, so the 9th of Av, so that's tomorrow, July 30th. And basically on that day is when the holy temples were destroyed. Okay, 1 in 423 BCE and 69 CE. Okay, so both the first and second holy temples, this is from Chabad.org. Both the first and second holy temples which stood in Jerusalem were destroyed on Av 9. The first temple by the Babylonians in the year 3338 from creation, and the second by the Romans in 69 CE. The temple's destruction represents the greatest tragedy in Jewish history, for it marks our descent into Galut, the state of physical exile and spiritual displacement in which we still find ourselves today. Thus, the destruction is mourned as a tragedy that affects our lives today, 2,000 years later, no less than the very generation that experienced it firsthand. Um, um, so they still, feel that sense of, we're still in exile, okay? We're still not home, okay? Um, and so what's interesting, when the first temple was destroyed, there was actually two dispersions, okay? Um, so first the northern kingdom got scattered, and then the southern kingdom got scattered, okay? And they actually, it mentions the Babylonians. The northern kingdom actually got attacked by the Assyrians, okay? Um, and, and then in 70 CE, or 69 CE, the second temple was destroyed. Um, so the Jewish people, really kind of, they were really in exile. They didn't really have a country for a long time until until Israel in 1948, became a Jewish country again. So they really understand kind of this idea of, being in exile. Okay, so then let's read what else they say about it. Yet the 9th of Av is also a day of hope. The Talmud relates that Moshiach, the anointed one, the Messiah, was born at the very moment that the temple was set aflame and the Galut began. Okay, this is in keeping with the teachings of our sages that in every generation is born a descendant of Judah who is worthy to become Israel's Moshiach. When the time will come, God will reveal himself to him and send him, and then the spirit of Moshiach, which is hidden and secreted on high, will be manifested in him. So obviously some of these teachings don't match kind of what Christianity believes. But it's interesting to me. Well, and then also to this concept that the Messiah was born um, when the temple was set aflame. I mean, what that would make him, I don't know, 2,000 years old or something like that, or not quite that much, but still. But it is kind of an interesting picture because I think it's kind of a prophetical picture because I do believe that when um, we see the nation of Israel set aflame, that is when the Messiah is going to show up. Um, when he's going to return to earth. So, um, so it's interesting that they have this teaching. And then I brought in this other quote too of, um, um, from the Jewish people, where they say, "Those who mourn the destruction of Jerusalem will merit seeing it rebuilt with the coming of Mashiach." So I like that quote. Um, so it's very interesting that they connect the ninth of Av to the coming of the Messiah. So very interesting. Okay. The other, just some other facts about the ninth of Av. It's the 5th month or the 11th month on the Jewish calendar. So then the ninth of Av, so then you get like 9/11 from the ninth of Av. Um, or 11/9, or, you know, um, you know, I mean, the Jewish people write their dates. Um, we write the month first and then the day, and they do it the other way. They do the day first and the month. And so it is 9/11, on their calendar, the way they write it. They write 9 Av, and so 9, 9/11, so very interesting. And then what's interesting this year about the ninth of Av, well, I mean, this happens every year, but it's the 22nd day of the 3 weeks of fasting. So they fast for 3 weeks starting on the 17th of Tammuz, which this year was July 9th. Okay. And so kind of like, and then for the last 9 days of their fasting, so we see Daniel, he's in the 3 weeks of fasting, and then he sees the Messiah show up like on day 24. So it's kind of like he sees the Messiah. He has a messianic encounter like 3 days after he was fasting for 3 weeks. So it's possible that, while we might not see the Messiah show up on the 9th of Av, that we could see him show up 3 days after the 9th of Av, which would be, okay, so, okay, 1, 2, 3 would be like August 3rd, okay? So what's interesting about that day is that it's 8-3. You have the 8 is connected to Messiah, and then you have 3, the 3 that's connected to Messiah. Um, so we'll just have to see. I don't, we'll see what happens tomorrow on the 30th, if anything happens. And then if nothing happens, don't give up hope, because maybe 3 days later, like I said, I don't think we have to wait till 9/11 for something to happen. Now it's possible too, we could be looking at 8/11 too. So the August 11th, that might be a possible date. For something to happen. Okay. So then, like I said, the 9th of Av is also so I didn't mention this too. The last 3, they have 3 weeks of fasting, the Jewish people, and then the last 9 days is kind of a more intensified mourning. Okay. And so the 9th of Av is the 9th day of the 9 days of fasting. Okay. Okay, so then, so I wanted to mention I saw this yesterday on a video of, it's actually the guy who does the Bible codes. He was talking about the 6 and the 9. And so, like, he talked about the 6 being kind of like an earthly number, and the 9 being like a heavenly number. And if you look at the numbers themselves, you know how 6, it's like the circle part is, low to the ground, and then 9, the circle part is like up in the heavens. And so I thought that was interesting because we see with, the third beast, or we see the 666 connected to, the third beast in Revelation. And then, you know, and then I think, we see that number 9 could be connected to Jesus. Okay. Um, so definitely interesting. And then what's interesting too about July 30th is that that's the 66th day of the riots in America. Um, so that's very interesting. Um, um, so I don't. Um, what's the other thing too I wanted to point out too was, okay, so 66. Let me think. I gotta count here because my numbers aren't matching up. Okay, so 66, 67, 68, 69, 70. Okay, so August 3rd, is the if the riots continue, that would be the 70th day of the riots. So, we see in scripture where God talks about Babylon, like, we're going to be in exile in Babylon for 70 years. Okay. So that's why a 70-day time frame could be interesting. The 66 time frame I thought was interesting because we see the woman when she gives birth, she's unclean for 66 days. And then it says, after the 66 days, then she's supposed to go to the temple and bring a sacrifice. So that's why it's possible that something might not happen on Tish B'Av, the 9th of Av, because, maybe it's, sometime after the 9th of Av is when Israel gets sacrificed. So that's the deal. Okay. Also, the 9th of Av is the 10th month after Rosh Hashanah. We see Esther goes to the king in the 10th month. So, so that's why I'm saying we could expect the Messiah really soon. It seems almost too obvious that he would show up on the 9th of Av. But it would definitely fit in history. It would, continue that trend that, it would be a bad day, for the Jewish people if Israel gets attacked. But there are some patterns that, maybe it doesn't necessarily have to happen on that day, for prophecy to be fulfilled. That's, what makes prophecy difficult is that we see in part right now. We're not really sure how it's going to play out. I mean, for me, it's almost like, could that be why God gave us 9/11? You know, to tell us to look for that, um, but then is 9/11 the day we look for something to happen, or do we look for something to happen 3 days later? I don't know. Or do we see the patterns that happened on 9/11 and then we see them fulfilled later? I don't know. So these are a couple other verses I wanted to talk about. You know how I talked about like the number 6 being kind of the earthly number, and 9's like the heavenly number. Well, the number 8's kind of interesting because that would be where you take those two concepts. It's like the concept of the heavenly and the earthly like happening all at the same time. Okay. And so what's interesting is that we see, oh, so like the woman, after she gives birth, she's supposed to bring a sacrifice, or, well, if she gives birth to a male child, then she's supposed to circumcise him on the 8th day. Okay. Um, so we could kind of see this picture of, like the Jewish people being cut off on the 8th day, being circumcised on the 8th day. Okay. And then that would connect to this picture of, um, something happening in the heavenlies while something's happening on the earth. Okay. And so I have a couple verses that, okay, so down here in Genesis 7:11, okay, so this is talking about the great flood. Okay. And so it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were open. Okay, so we see that concept of, like the abyss is bursting open and the heavens are bursting open on, when the great flood happened. Okay, so that is definitely this picture of, where if Israel gets attacked, and we read in scripture where, it's the people connected to the dragon, that come to attack, um, and the abyss is definitely connected to the dragon, and so it's like the abyss breaks open, to attack or whatever. Um, so, anyways, and I circled 7:11 because I thought that was kind of interesting that that's what that verse is. And then, so let's go back to this verse at the top. This is Moses talking in Deuteronomy, and so he's talking about. Okay, let me read it. The Lord spoke to you face to face at the mountain from the midst of the fire, while I was standing between the Lord and you at that time to declare to you the word of the Lord. For you were afraid because of the fire and did not go up to the mountain. And so here's another verse that shows us where it's like, like if you think of the Lord being the Messiah, the Lord spoke to you face to face at the mountain from the midst of the fire, so it's like, we hear the voice of Jesus at the same time the fire is happening. Um, so definitely it's just in scripture all over the place. Um, so, so just once again, if you see Israel burning and America burning, you are out of time unless belong to Jesus. So that's my video. So I don't really know the significance of the 9th of Ab, but we definitely want to, look up for our redemption draws nigh. There's a lot of prophetic connections connected to, July 30th, the 9th of Av. And so we just have to wait and see what happens. So keep your eyes open. Hang in there, because I really think the Messiah is at the door. And, the pictures, that God's showing, we can expect him really soon. So thanks for listening. I hope you're blessed, and we'll keep you updated, Lord willing, if there's more information. So hang in there. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate you listening to my videos, and considering what I have to say, and just think about, a lot of these pictures here and what you think, and feel free to comment. I'm open to hear comments of what you think God might be saying in these events that were happening in the world. So thank you so much. God bless.